Okay, so I do think we have everyone who was just trying to join the meeting. So I think we should go ahead and start so we have enough time to answer all our questions. As I said, I'm Nick Bazulak. I'm the Director of Continuing Studies, and I'd like to welcome you to Maine College of Art and the Archival Storytelling Q&A session with Erin Murphy. Thank you for joining us, Erin.
Happy to be here, thanks.
Great. I can't wait to get started. But before we do, I'd like to just go over a few little details. So the way we have structured this Q&A is that Erin and Shiva Debandi are going to have a conversation. And then at the end, we'll open it up for some questions. So if you do have a question, please wait to the end. And if you could use the little clap feature in the in Zoom, that would be great, because that will let me know that you have a question and like raising your hand, and then I'll connect you, unmute you. So that would be easy. And then also, if you're not comfortable with that, you can also send your question in chat and I can make sure it's answered. The other thing I'd like to share with everybody is that this is being recorded. So please know that, and if you're more comfortable having the video off, feel free to do so. Once this session is over, we are going to post it to our public YouTube channel. So please know that in advance. What else? And the other thing is, if you, you might have read in the email, by attending this Q&A, and if your friends would like to watch it in the YouTube version, and you'd like to take Erin's workshop, then there's a discount code for you to apply to the total. And so that discount code is capital SALTQ +A. And that will also be in the YouTube description, so you know that. If for some reason you are already enrolled in the class and you're really excited and you just had some questions for Erin, we will go back to your account and refund the discount for attending this session. So I just wanted to clarify those few things. And I guess right now I'd love to hand it over to Shiva and Erin.
Great, thank you, Nick, so much. Hello, and thank you everyone for your interest in the archival storytelling course. My name is Shiva Debandi. I'm the library director at Maine College of Art, as well as a really big fan of our SALT instructor and documentary filmmaker, Erin Murphy. Thank you so much for joining us, Erin. I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but I do want to give you a little bit more information about Erin and go over a few questions that we have before we dive into a full-on Q&A. So Erin Murphy is a documentary filmmaker and educator based in Portland, Maine. She is currently in post-production on her first feature-length documentary, Wazo Idea. Her film is a collaboration with the members of Kesho Wazo, a youth activist art collective. Feel free to let me know if I've mispronounced that, Erin.
You're doing great.
Thank you. Her work is screened at the Maine International Film Festival, the Rochester International Film Festival, the Big Muddy Film Festival, and MPBN. As a freelancer, Erin has shot and produced over 20 short documentaries for clients in Maine and Massachusetts. She is a visiting instructor at Colby College and teaches courses on documentary filmmaking and digital storytelling. So we're really excited about the upcoming archival storytelling course you'll be teaching for SALT. It runs July 13th through the 21st. And as many of you probably already know, students can learn more about the course by visiting the online workshop and classes section of cs.meca.edu. So Erin, thank you again for joining us. I wanted to actually begin by asking about SALT. It has such a rich history in the state of Maine. Can you tell us a little bit more about its origins and the work that's been produced through its programs?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for that great introduction as well, Shiva. That was really nice. So SALT, I'm fairly new to SALT, so I'm really excited to be teaching this course. I'm excited to try out some different online things I've wanted to experiment with. My course in the spring, I'm sure most of you know, we had to leave Colby, and I had to quickly adapt my in-person class to an online class. So it was draining and tiring, but it was also really interesting to kind of think through different ways of sharing our work with each other online. So I'm really excited about those possibilities. But the question was about SALT. So SALT is just this amazing program. It was started in 1973. And it's been ongoing, and people from all over have come to Maine, have come to Portland to learn how to tell documentary stories, both with audio, with photography, with video. And you can even look online at we can explore some of the past stories that have been told. And as someone who's a Maine-based filmmaker, it's just incredible the depth and the breadth of stories that have come out of SALT about Maine. And stories not just about Maine, but stories that relate to everybody else outside of Maine too. So it's been amazing watching the different things that have come out of SALT over time.
Great, thank you so much, Erin. And can you tell us a little bit more about the SALT archival storytelling course that you'll be teaching?
Yeah, definitely. So the way I approach my courses and teaching is this kind of blend of the theoretical with the practical. So for this course, kind of what the name says, archival retelling, we're going to be working with archives, in particular institutional archives. So things like archive.org, the Library of Congress, and looking at these kind of materials from the perspective of a filmmaker. So what kind of questions do these materials prompt us to think about? What does this material tell us about the way we're living our lives today? A lot of this material is ephemeral, which basically means it wasn't created to entertain. It was created as a way to educate or to explain. So we're looking at things that are were created not for the purposes of telling stories necessarily. So we want to look at this material and figure out how we can kind of appropriate it for our own kind of interests and our own storytelling possibilities. So we'll look at the ways other filmmakers have done this. So we're going to watch a lot of films, we're going to talk about them, break them down, break them apart. How do they get to this point? How do they arrive at this idea? But then also part of that, we're going to be learning kind of the logistics and the hands-on part of it. So how do you take a seed of an idea of like, oh, this clip's really interesting. How do you turn that into a 5-minute narrative? What's the beginning? What's the middle? What's the end? Do you do voiceover? Do you have music? Do you use text? And then very much, how do you use Adobe Premiere? How do you put 2 clips together? How do you add music to that? How do you record a voiceover? So it's very kind of like top level theoretical, but at the same time, giving you the tools that you need to kind of make those stories.
That sounds amazing. And as a librarian and a lover of archives and documentary films, everything you just said speaks to my heart. I have so many more questions, but I also want to make sure that others who have joined us have an opportunity to ask anything that's come to mind. So I'm just going to pause for a moment in case there's other questions from the group. And if not, I'd love so we can jump into some more questions. So I know you mentioned Adobe Premiere. So I'm wondering what kind of skills a participant would need, or a student would need in this class. I'm sorry, develop. So
develop. Okay. So I think there are a lot of skills that I want to cover in this class. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I get everything that I want to say. So definitely the storytelling part of it. So what is the storytelling process? But I also want you to think about your own personal relationship to that process. So I want you to cultivate a sense of your creative process. So how do you get ideas? Where do you find those? One thing we'll talk about is, do you go into the archive with an idea already in mind, looking for kind of what you're interested in, or do you kind of go in with an open mind and kind of let these things wash over you and write down notes of things that kind of are interesting to you and you explore those more? So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, like what comes first with your creative process. And I don't think there's a right answer to that. I think there is individually. So I hope in this course that you start to kind of think about, okay, what's my own personal creative practice? What do I need my environment to be to make that happen? So that's kind of one of the primary things. And then also some of the things we'll cover, obviously the basics of editing with Adobe Premiere. We're going to talk a little bit about copyright and fair use. So why is it legal for us to take somebody else's film or somebody else's photograph and repurpose that for your own kind of experiment or their own film that you're making? So why is that legal? Is it legal? So we'll talk a lot about that. And then one of the great things about this class and having it happen with other people is that you'll have the benefit of practicing giving feedback and also receiving feedback. So you'll watch each other's material, give comments, give ideas, suggestions, and then you'll also get that same kind of feedback from your peers and from me as well. So I think it's just more than anything, obviously you'll learn how to work with archives and edit, but you're going to learn a lot about yourself as a filmmaker.
Excellent. It sounds very robust.
Yeah, we're going to do a lot in a week.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the technical requirements a student might need for the course?
Yep, and I'm definitely going to look at my notes for that. The main thing is to have a computer that's fast enough to edit video. And what that kind of means is at least 8 gigs of available RAM. So that's the processing power of your computer. And ideally, you'll have at least 50 gigs of open space on this computer. If you're like me, that's impossible. And you have to use an external hard drive. I just fill up whatever containers that I'm in. So you might want to look into getting an external hard drive. For that, I tend to tell students the WD passport drives, and I can send out a link to all this technical information, but I think it's Western Digital. You can get those for like $60 and have 2 terabytes. It connects with USB 3. It's fast enough to use. My only worry about hard drives is if you have one that's just like sitting in a box that you haven't touched for 6 years, you're like, oh, I'm going to try and use this, and it only holds like 200 gigs. Those probably won't be fast enough for editing video, unfortunately. But again, it's storage is pretty cheap and easy to come by these days. So if you know that you're going to keep making films and keep acquiring content, it might be a good idea to invest in a drive and just store everything there. But if you do have enough space on your own computer, probably 50 gigs is more than enough for this class. But one thing students do run into is they're halfway through the edit and they're like, my computer has no more space on it, and everything just shuts down. And you don't want that in only a week-long class. Some of the other things to keep in mind, obviously a webcam. We're going to have a couple class meetings. I mean, it's not essential that you be seen, but it might be nice. So a microphone on your computer. The other thing that might be a possibility in this class is you might decide that you want to record a voiceover. You don't have to, but if you know that's something that you kind of gravitate towards, you might want to think about different options for that. Honestly, your smartphone, put yourself in a closet, record the voiceover, that's going to sound great. But if you do want to invest in the materials to do this longer term and professionally, you might want to look into getting an external audio recorder, and I can help walk you through the different options of that over email, or we can set up a Zoom time to talk about it. So that's definitely a possibility. Obviously, Adobe Premiere for editing will be a necessity. Adobe offers a 7-day trial. So you could use that for this class, but just don't download it until the first day of class, or else you're going to run out of time. But Adobe also offers a monthly subscription for that. Yeah, so that's kind of the technical stuff.
Great, thank you. Thank you for outlining that so well. I have a question about editing. So I'm someone who does a little bit of editing on my phone every now and then, but I'm a little bit intimidated by the idea of doing editing in something like Adobe Premiere. Can you tell us, can you give us any words of wisdom or any way to make us feel a little bit better, those of us who are nervous about doing some kind of more robust video editing?
Yeah, definitely. So this class is geared towards people who have never even touched Premiere. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I haven't talked this much in the past month to anybody. But Adobe Premiere, or the class I don't expect you to come in with any prior knowledge. So it's totally fine if you come in and you haven't edited anything. And it's also totally fine if you come in and you've edited 5 films. The way I approach editing is that it's always a learning process. I mean, I've been editing for 15 years and I'm still learning things as I edit. So just be aware that it's kind of this lifelong process. And the other thing too is you don't have to be an experienced editor to put something together that's really compelling. I mean, just look at YouTube, right? And people publish their own stuff there. You don't have to be a top-notch editor. And so the other thing that'll happen too is I'm going to give you tutorials. We can set up individual meetings where we share screens with each other so I can show you different tricks and things like that. So depending on where you're at, it could be very basic of like, how do we import media, to how do I do a split screen and how do I keyframe some animation. So I'm going to gear it towards your level of understanding. So don't be scared of that. And I've taught Adobe Premiere several times, and I mean more than several times, but people really pick it up quickly. So even people that are like, I'm terrified of technology, I can't believe I'm going to edit something, what is this? I mean, it kind of comes to you. So I wouldn't be too nervous.
Shiva, I have a question. Erin, we were wondering if you could talk a bit about the schedule, like the time in class versus expected time to work on your own projects, and maybe a little bit about like the schedule of the week.
Yep. So, well, there'll be more face-to-face contact early on, of course, where I'm talking to you about things and you're listening. That's probably gonna be a very small part of it. I think most of it is gonna be you at your computer editing and working on your idea and researching. So we'll have, I think it was 2 class meetings where I think they're about an hour to 2 hours each, where I will be professing, I guess. And then we'll have breakout sessions where you meet with kind of a core group that you're gonna work with throughout the week. So those will happen kind of at a smaller time where the people in the group can set that schedule of when that happens. So I do think a lot of this is going to be self-directed. So it's going to be you working outside of the class on the project. And I'm going to be available throughout that week. So if you want to set up individual sessions, we can do that as well. But it's kind of going to be this blend of using the online learning platform Moodle, along with a little bit of Google Drive and some kind of face-to-face conversations on Zoom or Google. I don't think that's been decided yet.
Great. Is there like, I know you said that it's up to the individual, but is there like, should I expect a certain number of hours to get the work done? Do you have a general idea of like what I should carve my week out to be, or how much time maybe I should give myself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing this as a pretty intensive, like everyday thing. So I would make this the priority of your day. You can certainly pop in for the meetings during the day while you're working your full-time job or childcare, whatever it is you're doing, and then have the nighttime to do that. So I think it's kind of up to you how you structure your day. But I would expect, I mean, the thing I always hear from students is I had no idea how long this would take. And I say that every week. It's not anything that I ever learned for myself. It always takes longer than expected. So especially when it gets to the editing phase, I would say at that point, like, I mean, because you're gonna get through this class with a finished film. So I would say 8-hour editing days, if not more towards the end. And it is kind of split by the weekend, and the way that I've planned it, I have no expectations that you work over the weekend, but you can certainly work the whole weekend if you wanted to on the film. So I would plan on spending quite a chunk of time on this course.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
And that was one of the questions that came in. Will you leave the class with a finished piece? Can you tell us a little bit more about it obviously might vary, but what that finished piece might look like?
Yeah, I'm expecting a 5-minute film. And again, I mean, you could work on one film for months, right? You could always tweak it. You could always find something new. So it's just kind of up to you when you feel like you're finished with it. So ideally, you'll feel like you're finished with it by the end, but it's also not the end of the world if it's not, and it's something that you keep working on. I've been emailing with a student who might be taking the class, and she has a much larger project that she's interested in. So she's using this as kind of a launching point to that project. So it just kind of depends on your own individual needs and what you want to accomplish. And that's something that I want to talk about on the first day of class. Like, what do you want to get out of this? How finished do you want this project to be? And I do think there is room. I mean, if you're super busy with different things and you want to just have a project sketch by the end, that's totally fine as well. Does that kind of answer the question?
I think so. I mean, that flexibility sounds great. And I saw another question come in, so I'm just going to ask it, but feel free to jump in, Nick, if you would rather. Should we start to think about ideas for the project ahead of time? Any prompts for us to consider?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to. So if you just want to start looking through internetarchive.org, you can start doing that. I don't have any expectation that you'll come to the course with an idea already. But if you do, that's great, because then you're already kind of in a good spot for that. I mean, the other thing too, so I spoke earlier about, do you come to the archive with an idea already in your mind, or do you kind of come with an open mind and just let things wash over you? So I have had students kind of struggle more with coming into it with an idea. They have a very specific idea of what they need, and sometimes the archive is not your friend and it's not going to pull up that footage for you. So then it becomes a very kind of, almost like a Google search project, which is less interesting rather than finding a clip that kind of speaks to you and makes you think of something that's happening today. So it just kind of depends on your work process and how you approach things.
Great. And we have another question kind of along those lines, and I feel like you've touched on it already, but maybe you could speak to it a little further. The question is, are the archives something they can have access to after the class as well?
Yep, these are public archives, so you could start looking at them now, and you can use them whenever you want to use them. So the reason for that in this course is we wanted to make these, to give you footage to work with that's available to you. So we don't have to jump through hoops. We don't have to worry too much about copyright here. Most of the stuff that you'll encounter in these archives are free and clear to use. Another project I sometimes have students do is called found footage. So that's pulling stuff from YouTube where you don't have the copyright to it. And so the question of fair use becomes a lot stickier there. So these archives are open to you after the class, free and clear.
Great. And so that almost, to me, it sounds like you're giving students a structure really to continue this practice for much longer than just this 1 week. Is that correct?
Definitely, yes, yeah. So it's gonna help you figure out who you are as a filmmaker and how you like to edit, for sure. And use archives. So if you see your work using archives a lot in the future, this will be really, really helpful.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, I know in a previous conversation we had, you had mentioned never quite knowing what you'll find in the archives. I'm wondering if you can tell us about 1 or 2 interesting examples of things that you've stumbled upon.
Yeah, so there's this great archive in Maine. It's the Northeast Historic Film, and they're out of Bucksport, and I think they actually have the earliest known film clip of Gandhi. So they have some really amazing things there. And I was just kind of looking through, I wanted to I was really interested in farming for a while, and I wanted to do something about farming in Maine. And that's super broad, right? That could be anything. And so I stumbled on this clip. It's not even a clip. It was a 30-minute documentary shot in the 70s by WGBH in Boston about back to the landers that moved to Maine from New York City. So it's all these, basically hippies in the 70s, right? They want to move back and have a different way of life. And there was a clip of a woman speaking in there, and she said, we came to Maine to try and live life differently, but me and my husband, we've fallen into stereotypical gender roles. He does all the labor on the farm. I do all the cooking. I do all the selling. I go to the farmer's market. I'm the face of the farm. And that clip perfectly matched an interview I had a student did of a farmer that just moved here from Texas with her partner, her husband, and she was saying the same exact thing. We moved to Maine to try and have this different kind of life, but the way the farm kind of works is we break down into these kind of stereotypical gender categories. I'm like, oh wow, there's something there. I mean, between the 70s and now. So of course I put that in a folder. It's on my desktop. I haven't touched it. But in the future, that's kind of there for me. So I think that's what's really interesting to me about the archives is how do you connect what's happened in the past, what's happening in the present? And that's really kind of the goal of the course, is to bring the past into conversation with the present day. You can certainly use archives, kind of like the Ken Burns, World War II baseball documentaries where, I mean, I don't want to say this because it's more than that, but it is kind of like wallpaper, right? So you're talking about baseball in the 40s and you see footage of baseball in the 40s, and then you kind of move up through time. But what I'm really interested in as a filmmaker, and what I kind of want to push students to do in this class, is how do you take that footage and not manipulate, because that sounds kind of weirdly ethical, but how do you create stories with that footage that go beyond just to, this is how things were? How do you bring it into conversation with what's happening today is really, I think, the interesting part of it.
Great. All right, I know we're running short on time, but there's another question. A student is wondering if this class is for credit, and I can answer this one. This workshop is not for credit, but if you're interested in gaining credit through SALT, I will attach the link for the SALT certificate program. And Joel, if you want to jump in and give any little shout about it, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, I'm Joel Sui. I'm the graduate missions counselor at Maine College of Art. I also used to be a SALT TA and subsequently became a SALT alum. So big shout out to SALT. So as graduate missions counselor, I oversee a couple of the graduate program offerings we have at MECA, and SALT graduate certificate is one of them. It's a lot like SALT certificate in when SALT was an independent institution. So 15 weeks intensive. You pick a track. Currently, we have a radio and podcasting track, as well as a short film editing track. And this course is accredited, so you will earn graduate credits from it. So if you do decide that you want to continue your studies into a full-on graduate program, you can consult with the other graduate institution and say like, hey, I did this graduate certificate at SALT. Will these credits be applicable? So yeah, the 15-week program is accredited.
Thank you, Joel. All right, do we have any last questions before we lose the end of this meeting? I did put the discount code in the chat for anybody who also would like to have it. Erin, do you have any last words of wisdom?
I don't think so. I think I said everything I wanted to say, but that's not true. There is one other thing I want to say. I'm just really excited about seeing everybody's work. I don't know about you all, but I've just kind of been in this creative slump recently where I think filming is really important for me. And I do think the archive is one way that we can make films from home safely. Something I've kind of been struggling with is how to go out and film. And I do think the archive is kind of a space where we can try out different ideas and kind of get our creative thoughts going. So I'm really excited to see what you all do to fuel my creative practice, but then also you guys seeing everybody else's projects will hopefully boost your creativity and give you ideas about stories that you want to tell in the future. So I'm just really, really excited for this to happen.
Great. Well, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Shiva and Joel. And thank you everyone for coming out today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope you all have. And if any other questions come up, please reach out to us. Feel free to email us at cs.meca.edu. You can go to our website and find out more information on the workshop, and that's cs.meca.edu as well. So if there's nothing else, I'd like to say thank you and have a wonderful day. I hope to see some of you in the workshop.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.